Feel good music.
Growing up in Dublin, David Ryan would serve at Mass, and his brother Mark attended a prestigious boarding school called Black Rock, run by the Holy Ghost Fathers. And one of the priests was very friendly with their family.
He came to my parents' house and he just wormed his way into their home. He even celebrated Mass in our home a few times. Easter, special anniversaries, he would come up and celebrate Mass.
He was very much trusted and admired by the family.
100%.
David loved to swim, and when he was around 11 years of age, Father O'Byrne invited him and some friends down to the school swimming pool.
And I started going more and more because I was really interested in swimming. I wanted to be a swimmer. And I'd often go down and practice 4 or 5 times, in the evening, just to do length after length after length. And he would come in and lock the door. He'd make us wear thongs and put them on. And he'd sometimes walk around the pool naked. And then he'd get into the pool with us and he'd make us float on our backs like a crucifix. But he'd be groping us underneath the whole time. He'd take photographs, I thought, of my face, but he wasn't. He was taking my lower with the thongs on.
On some occasions, David was with others, but sometimes he was on his own. And that's when things got worse.
And he'd often say, come down to the lower shower, which was down at the back, but it was the warmest one. So he'd literally get me into the shower and he'd rape me. No stopping. He'd keep going. And he said, if I ever said anything, I'd be in trouble.
The first time it happened, what was going through your head?
I didn't know what was happening to my body. That's the simple. I didn't know anything what was going to happen. I was scared. He'd often put his hands around my throat when he was doing it. And he would say, you do not say anything about what happened here today. I could not say a word.
For years, the abuse continued and David stayed quiet. But then the parents of another student in the school made a complaint against the priest, and Father O'Byrne was sent away for treatment. But a few weeks later, returned to teach at the school, where he saw David once again.
I came in, he locked the door behind me, he told me to get naked, told me to lie down on the bed. He got my hands and he tied them. He got on top of me and he raped me again. This time I bled. I couldn't even sit on the bicycle to cycle home. I was in so much pain.
Father O'Byrne warned him to keep it a secret, and David did.
I never said a word, never said a word.
Stories like these are painful to hear, but sadly, they are the reality of what happened to many people in religious-run schools in Ireland. A new scoping report from the Irish government, which covered a time frame of 1927 to 2013, documented that over 800 clerics across 308 schools were alleged to have committed more than 2,300 cases of abuse.
My name is David Ryan, originally from Blackrock in County Dublin, now living in County Tipperary.
In 2022, David Ryan and his brother Mark, after 40 years of staying quiet, came forward and told their story in a radio documentary entitled Blackrock Boys.
We grew up in a cul-de-sac at home in Blackrock.
The programme was produced by the Doc on One team at RTE, the public broadcaster of Ireland.
For more than 20 years, David and Mark had been trying to deal with the abuse on their own.
And the man who made it is award-winning producer Liam O'Brien. When you were sitting there, Liam, hearing their stories, and as we can hear, just harrowing stories, what was going through your mind?
Well, I was very aware, both Mark and David were very clear, they had never detailed their abuse to anyone ever.
And I can still, to this day, smell the chlorine and the hotness of the pool.
I understood that once this story had got out, the identity of both Mark and David were forever changed. Their identities would never again be the same.
The radio documentary had a huge impact in Ireland, making headline news.
Once victims heard the vulnerability and then saw the bravery and courage to speak out, which is, it's not how it should be. It shouldn't be on victims to actually bring this stuff into the public domain. It should be the other way around. But nevertheless, once that occurred, I think that really empowered a lot of other victims. And then that's a domino and cascade effect.
Liveline on RTE Radio 1.
After David and Mark had told their story, one of Ireland's biggest radio shows, Liveline, was inundated with calls.
You say it is time that I told my story and rid myself of the shame and the guilt.
The abuse started, so I was 8, 9 at the time.
Its presenter is Joe Duffy. When you were getting those calls, Joe, from up and down the country, what was the feeling of people? Was it a shock? Was it disappointment? Was it dismay?
No, it was anger.
Anger.
It was anger. And day after day, we had people revealing for the first time their abuse in the school and the cover-up.
And that's when he started massaging me between my legs.
Although stories of sexual abuse had broken in Ireland before, this was a new wave of people coming forward. This time, mainly talking about their experiences in schools run by religious orders.
And this was a moment. And I think one of the reasons it became a moment is that the victims were of a certain age, Colm. They were later in life. Maybe they thought this is the last chance.
Yeah.
I'll get to go public.
They'd lived with it all of their lives.
Yeah.
Over and over, what the people were saying was that they wanted justice. But then the question was, what kind of justice and from who? As many of these cases were going back decades.
Restorative justice does not apply where the victims are all relatively old, but that the perpetrators are dead. You cannot confront the perpetrator unless you regard the perpetrator as this organisation called a religious order.
Some of the main religious orders that the alleged abusers came from and were named in this report were the Holy Ghost Fathers, the Jesuits, the Christian Brothers, and the Brothers of Charity. We reached out to a number of the religious orders asking for interviews, but unfortunately, they said that they were not in a position to do so at this time. However, Bishop Dermot Farell, the Archbishop of Dublin, was willing to sit down on camera. People look at society and they know that this is a problem that's not focused and exclusive to religious orders of the Catholic Church. It's a societal problem.
It's a societal problem.
But the bar, I suppose you could say, is much higher for men and women of God.
Absolutely.
People who have these high moral values.
You have high moral values, there's the integrity, there's the hypocrisy, so all of those things come into play. So there is a higher standard expected of the ministers of the Catholic Church.
And what is the Catholic Church's understanding here in Ireland when they look inwards at itself and the religious orders of how it happened?
There was no effort made to deal with the perpetrators. Sometimes they were left in situ, sometimes they were moved around, because I think there was maybe a thinking that the problem was with the person that they were involved in rather than the actual perpetrator. So if you move them somewhere else, that'll deal with the problem. But of course,
they were putting the blame on the victim.
Exactly, on the survivor, absolutely.
Oh. But how does that way of thinking manifest in someone's mind, or how does that?
I know we know now, we know different. But then there was, I suppose, because there was a sexual element in it, they didn't want to deal with that. That was part of maybe the shame. That they wouldn't actually deal with it or make it known. They kept it secret, if you want, and it was very secretive.
And then because of that, you had this forming a culture of denial, of
absolutely,
covering
a culture of denial, a culture of covering up, a culture of silencing, ignoring. All of those were, nobody would accept it. And I suppose the other thing was, it was endemic in society.
This is no longer about the church.
Yes, it may have been a problem across all of Irish society, but with an institution like the Catholic Church, with ordained men of God, in such positions of trust and power, there is now a sense of deep betrayal. Who knew at what levels? Because if it was happening where the priest and a student, and then maybe other priests might be aware, was the headmaster, was the bishop aware? Was the hierarchy of the Catholic Church? Do you think it was at all levels?
I think it was known at all levels. Yes, I think that in the case of priests, some of their colleagues knew about it, were aware, or at least suspicious that something wasn't right. Certainly, we know bishops knew about it. They were reported because they were the people who moved, somebody from A to B. There was a fortress mentality. That
protect the church first.
Protect the church first. Yeah, people closed ranks And there were serial perpetrators.
In the south of Ireland, in Ballincollig, lives Cornelius Crowley. He too is a survivor.
But why do we survivors have to demand justice?
From the age of 6, he was in religious-run boarding schools. And while he doesn't like to talk about what happened, he remembers how he felt.
I remember the absolute shock and fear and terror that just went right into me, because I was just a small child.
Without getting into the details of what happened, but as a child experiencing this for the first time, what are you thinking, or how do you comprehend and analyse it?
You don't. I didn't. I had none of those capacities. I was just like head down, trying to get through each day. I had no sense of the future. It was like, it's in the moment. Is it happening now? It's not. Okay. Is it about to happen?
Did you ever tell anyone about it at the time?
No, I couldn't. I couldn't even speak to other students about it. Like, I just endured it day after day after day after day.
Again, like so many others, Cornelius kept it as a dark secret for months, for years, for decades. It was only 3 years ago, at the age of 62, that Cornelius went for counselling through a group called Towards Healing, which is funded by the Catholic Church.
The expectation of every child to be held in love all the time.
And as a musician, Cornelius has used his talent and love of music as a way to get his feelings out and try and express his pain to others.
These are the gifts that life on earth is meant to bring. We bring those gifts. I broke down in tears because, first of all, I didn't think I need counselling because my coping was so effective. I'm still here, I've endured. And secondly, I didn't feel I deserved counselling because I didn't know that little Cornelius deserved to recover, to deal with this. Honest answers to their questions of life, space to grow fully assured and bright.
Now, the church and religious orders face an enormous task. There needs to be accountability, and those who have come forward to share their stories must get justice. How does the church even begin to try and be with those victims, help them in whatever way they can?
We've got to face up to it as all the baptised, and listening to the stories, understanding the stories, accepting the truth of those stories.
Should the church and the religious orders pay compensation to the victims?
Many of for example, in our own case, we have compensated victims that have come forward. When we try to settle all of those cases as quickly and expeditiously as possible. I think the religious orders, if they knew about cases and they came forward, have settled many of those cases.
The Catholic Church and religious orders in Ireland, like in many other parts of the world, have been paying out compensation for a number of years now. The Spiritans alone say that they have paid around €5 million since 2004 towards settling claims and support services, and survivors like David Ryan have been compensated. But with the publication of this government report, which documented cases that had already been known and settled, but also new ones where the victims have not yet been recognised, the question now is who should be paid compensation, how much should it be, and where that compensation should come from.
The report has recommended that the government consider a redress scheme for survivors.
The Irish government is saying that most of the blame lays with the religious orders, but others want to see the government take account of its role in this scandal. At Leinster House, the Irish government buildings in Dublin, Senator Ronan Mullen has written about this scandal, calling for government accountability and greater fairness when it comes to compensating the victims. Senator Simon Harris, who is the Taoiseach or Prime Minister of Ireland, has said that the state may have to use the law if the religious orders refuse to pay compensation to the victims. Do you think that's the right move?
Well, the Taoiseach knows very well that you can't just legislate to take away people's property. In this country or in any free country, there are constitutional rights. What he's trying to suggest is that the religious orders have been dragging their feet on compensation for victims of abuse. Now, my understanding is that many of the religious orders have been doing a lot of work, and for years, in the area of redress of various kinds, meeting with victims of abuse, apology, contributing towards counselling and healing processes, and paying out compensation. The problem is that the religious orders are not very good at communicating to the public what they have been doing. Maybe there's more they should be doing, we don't know. So I would like to see the religious orders taking it on as a moral duty to get out there and find a way of communicating exactly what is happening. It suits the Taoiseach and it suits the state, which has disproportionate resources, to say, you know, this is mainly a religious orders problem and they are the ones we need to chase down for money. But that's being selective and that's being perhaps a bit cynical.
Is it not mainly a religious order problem when they were the ones running the schools?
Well, undoubtedly a great many of the schools in Ireland were run by religious orders. It's to the Church's credit that it was in the business of providing so much education and healthcare. The problem is also that we've only had a scoping inquiry into religious run schools, and the hundreds of state established and state run secondary schools were not covered at all.
In response to the global sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, in 2013, Pope Francis established the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, an independent institution connected with the Vatican to introduce and implement world-class safeguarding measures for children across the Church. Teresa Devlin works with the Commission.
People are wondering now, Teresa, in Ireland, how different is the Church of today and its institutions? How different is it to the Church of those days when this horrific abuse was able to take place?
Yeah, it was done in darkness in the past. We now have very good mechanisms for ensuring that proper procedures are in place. So all children are aware of and are educated in how to keep safe. But it's not their responsibility, it is the responsibility of the adults. So the adults in the church are trained, they are supported, they follow a code of behaviour in relation to supervision, how to behave with children, how to interact online. And then most critically and importantly, there is a system of audit, review and inspection. And if you talk to most people, they would say that the church in Ireland is a safer place today than other aspects of life.
Ireland was once upon a time known for being one of the most Catholic countries in the world. In the 50s and the 60s, Sunday Mass attendance was estimated to be around 95% of the population. For different reasons, it has been declining over the decades. And of course, a big part of that is undoubtedly people losing faith in the Church as a result of the stories of abuse. And sadly, many faithful left feel that now the vast good deeds done by the majority of the Catholic Church will be forgotten or ignored because of the bad deeds of the minority.
It's one of the aspects that I think is a very easy hit for society to make, in that they constantly say it point a finger at the Church, and the Catholic Church in this instance. But this was far wider and far more pervasive than the Church. So the Church was, asked by the state to educate the young people of Ireland. That's going back to the foundation of the Republic of Ireland. And for the most part, they did a brilliant job. Like lots of this can get lost in the midst of really dark stories like this. But it is our opportunity as a society to start moving on. We know we don't live in a country like that anymore in terms of school settings particularly. We know that the clergy has changed hugely.
You are a man of faith, and you have been involved in religious and faith programming here in Ireland for many years on radio and in television. So you have seen and heard both sides. You've interviewed those who have done incredibly good work in the name of their faith and the Church. Now you have been on the other end.
In a bizarre sense, Colm, I think the attitude of Irish people of faith, and there are a lot of people of faith, as you know, still Sunday Mass is big here, Saturday evening Mass is big here. Go drive through any town, you'll still see fleets after fleets of cars parked. The sense of goodness that people have, the sense of helping others, especially those who are down, those, that is extraordinarily strong in Ireland, Colm. That is the church should get credit for that.
Christian Brother-run orphanages.
Many of the accused perpetrators have died. Others are so old, it's unlikely they'll be able to face justice in the criminal courts. Archbishop Dermot Farell says that the entire ordeal is like an open wound in Ireland, which will continue to cause pain and suffering.
It is a wound in the church, and that wound will only be healed when we have full transparency through accountability. That's the challenge for the church today, because until that happens...
And is the church ready for that challenge? Is it?
Yes. Yeah, we are. We have been always encouraging people to come forward at every opportunity, that people who have been abused come forward, and we try and have accountability and justice for them, because that's the only way we'll make a safer environment for our children.
And for the victims, even with compensation paid, apologies said, that wound is still very painful. If you met today those priests and religious who perpetrated those crimes against you, what would you say to them?
Go to jail. Go to jail where you can't harm anybody ever again. And what you did to me was wrong, but worse than wrong. It was nasty and evil and cruel, and it ruined my life to a certain extent. I've done the best I can in my life coping with it. The expectation of every child to be held in love all the time.
Cornelius says that only when the church and religious orders fully account for what happened, that they will be able to start really healing.
These are the gifts that life on earth is meant to bring. We bring those gifts. We're not out for revenge. We're not out to hurt anyone. We want this resolved in the most Christ-like, from the point of view of Catholics, the most Christ-like manner possible. These are the gifts that life on earth is meant to bring. We bring those gifts.
And for David, well, tragically, his brother Mark died suddenly of a major stroke last year. David believes from the stress of sharing his abuse story, the stress of a secret he had kept for 40 years. How is your life now? Do you still think about it? Are you putting it in the past as much as you can, or is it impossible? Or?
You never forget about it. You never forget it. There's every day. It ruined my life. It ruined Mark's life. My brother's now gone. And other people have only started to come forward now. Their lives have been ruined. These other priests are dead. They're dead. But there are people still alive, and they have to be brought to justice. Age is only a number. Doesn't matter. They have to be tried and put down.
As the victims continue to come forward and share their stories, and the faithful here in Ireland still try to make sense of what happened, now for the Irish government, for the church, and especially the religious orders, the focus will be on accountability and delivering justice. But just what that will look like, and if it will be good enough for those who have been so badly betrayed, remains to be seen. In Ireland, Colm Flynn, EWTN News in Depth.